Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Faith and Recovery Live. As you can perhaps hear, I am out of doors again. You can hear the bugs making noise. I actually like that noise. It's kind of nostalgic for me. I remember it when I was growing up as a kid. Spend the summers outdoors. And I don't know, I just like the sound. It's very restful for me. But Faith and Recovery Live is not about bugs. So I haven't had anybody bring up any topics for discussion or any question and response topics. So what I thought I would do is just kind of revisit something that's foundational to what I do in Faith and Recovery, and in something that I have tried to teach people and show people, and something I live by. It's a foundational part of my recovery. It's a foundational part of my faith. So I'm just going to spend some time just kind of sharing about that. I did spend this morning with someone, and this topic came up, and so I thought, you know what, that would be something good to share on Faith and Recovery Live. So if you've heard me teach before, if you've heard me speak at recovery events before, you've probably heard some of this before. But if you haven't, then maybe you'll hear something new. So, Faith and Recovery, that's the name of the ministry that I do. That's the name of this live, Faith and Recovery Live. Why faith and recovery? Why linking the two? Why putting those two together? Well, my story started inside a faith community. And I grew up in a faith community. I went to church. I had a good relationship with biblical things. I loved Jesus. These were things that were just a part of my life. Faith was very huge for me. It was pretty much my life. We would go to meetings at other churches. We would go to church more than once a week. We would go to yearly meetings where we would have more preaching and singing and lots of faith-related activities. And yet I found myself in addiction. So what's up with that? When I found myself in addiction, I started moving toward recovery. I chased recovery with all I had in me. My counselors and the people that were trying to speak life into me, this was something that they said, hey, you need to do. So that's what I did. And I worked the steps, the 12 steps. I worked the program. I trusted the program. I learned to trust the program. And there was a period of time where it was new. It was novel. There was something about it that, because it was new, because it was something I hadn't done before, it made sense to do it. I don't know if that makes any sense, but when you've been trying something over and over and it hasn't worked, just the fact that you're doing something different feels like progress. And so for a pretty serious period of time, I'd say maybe a year and a half, 2 years or so, just the fact that I was doing recovery work was enough. That felt like there was enough meaning in that. There was enough value in that. But after a while, recovery left to its own devices, like any other system of performance or behavior management. It gets top heavy. It starts to collapse under its own weight. Like, there's only so much you can change about your behavior. There's only so much that you can change about your life by changing your behavior. And so what I found is that the further I went into recovery, the closer I came, almost like back in a circle, back to faith. And yet, the deeper I went into my faith, the more full circle I came into recovery behaviors. And so what I have tried to do in my ministry is to share that with people, faith and recovery. A healthy faith needs recovery. Why does a healthy faith need recovery? Well, a healthy faith is one that is resilient, one that is faithful, one that just keeps doing the work, one that doesn't stop when the feelings aren't there, one that doesn't shut down because of difficulty or adversity, one that has a perspective of where to put your foot in the next minute. That's a healthy faith. Well, those are all supplied by recovery. The 12 steps offer something where you just know what the next thing to do is. You know how to manage what you're supposed to do. You know how to respond in certain situations because it's all laid out for you. It's all right there. Sorry for the background noise. There's a large vehicle just across the way. So a healthy faith needs recovery. Another thing that a healthy faith has is the ability to lift you out of where you're at. Like, a healthy faith gives meaning and gives direction, and recovery behaviors do that. So when you are in a situation, part of what you need is a way to name that situation. If you're in a circumstance where, let's say, for example, you know that there's something about you that needs to change, and you know that it's something that you can't change, but it has to change. It needs to be changed. A lot of times, faith communities don't have a good language for that. Now, I'm not saying that at their core, the smartest people in that faith community don't, but I'm saying at a popular level, the people that walk in the doors of a church, they may not have a language for that. Recovery provides that language. That's called a character defect. But then you say, okay, well, if we let recovery take over, then where does Jesus go? Like, aren't you like cutting God out of the whole picture? No. Because a healthy recovery requires faith. A healthy recovery requires faith for a couple of reasons. First of all, you have to be recovering towards something. When you first get into recovery, you're really typically running from something. There's something behind you that you're trying to get away from. You're trying to get away from the addiction, trying to get away from the hurt, trying to get away from the trauma, trying to get away from the pain, whatever. That only lasts so long. In my experience, working with people, it typically lasts for about a year. 9 months to a year is about as long as you can run from something in recovery. At that point, you have to start running towards something. You have to have something in your life that pulls you forward, pulls you toward some kind of recovery. And faith provides that, because it's something for you to, here. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties on my part. I apologize. I'm very sorry for everybody that was watching. Hopefully you can find your way back. But what I was saying is that recovery requires faith. And the reason is because in recovery you have to have something to pull you forward. You have to have a reason to move on, something to draw you forward into recovery, because you can only run from what's behind you for so long. And faith offers that, because faith in its purest form is living as if God is who he says he is, living as if Jesus is who he claimed to be. And so a healthy recovery requires that kind of faith to pull you forward, to pull you toward your higher power, pull you toward Jesus. And a healthy faith requires recovery to give you the tools, to give you the steps to take to move toward Jesus. So another way to look at this, another way to think about this is that just in your mind, picture an iceberg. And you picture an iceberg and you see the beautiful white thing floating on top of the water. But what you know, because you've been to middle school, is that there's this huge amount of ice underneath the water. This huge amount of ice that's down underneath that you can't see. When we get into our addictions, we go underwater. We go underwater. We start living a living death. We're trying to breathe underwater. And when we get into recovery, we start climbing out. We start moving toward the top of that iceberg. Now, when we get sober, when we get clean, when we get out of our active addictions, where we are on that iceberg is just barely above water. Now, that might sound disappointing, but it's actually not. So let me explain. When we are underneath the water, that's when we are just barely surviving, just barely making it, and our addiction pulls us further and further down, and we begin to move into death. But once we start working recovery, we actually get our noses above water. So we're on the side of the iceberg, just barely with our heads above water. Now, that's as far as recovery takes you. That's as far as recovery goes. So how do you get further? How do you get higher up? How do you get actually onto the very top of the iceberg, where you're not down where where a wave can wash over you and knock you down, or where like parts of your body are still freezing to death because they're still in the water, but at least your head's above water, you're breathing air again. How do you get higher up that? Well, that's where faith comes in. See, recovery is good for getting the bad stuff gone, but it doesn't do much for getting the good stuff in. And if you work a recovery that's healthy, you're going to get to a point, you're going to come to steps 10, 11, 12, and it talks about 11 is making conscious contact with our higher power. And 12 is about giving back, which requires gratitude. And the only way you can have gratitude is if you acknowledge yourself to have less power than something that has behaved benevolently toward you. And who's that going to be? Now, some people call it the universe, some people call it higher power, whatever. A faith supplies that and gives you a God to give thanks to, and gives you a God to be grateful to, and then you can actually work step 12 appropriately. Because what happens is, what I have seen happen, I've seen people try to work the 12 steps without getting rid of the performance-based mindset, the performance-based paradigm. And this goes back to that burnout that we talked about a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was last week. As long as our understanding of what it means to be good is doing, we've just lit a very long fuse, is all we've done. There will be destruction at some point. And so the only way to get away from that, the performance-based goodness, is to move toward gratitude-based goodness. And that requires a relationship with a higher power. There's no way to live in gratitude where I am the biggest thing in my life, where I am the greatest power, where I am the definer of reality and the definer of truth. As long as I take that slot, I have nothing above me to be grateful to. So, faith supplies that and allows me to live in gratitude, which then empowers my recovery to be powered by gratitude and something drawing me forward, which then allows it to be more long-lasting. When we discover this about recovery, then what does this contribute back to faith? Well, what this does to faith is C.S. Lewis, an author I really enjoy. One of the things he talks about is that when you're trying to have courage, it is often in a great moment of feeling fear that you actually have courage. So what does it mean to have courage? To have courage does not mean to feel courageous. To have courage means to behave courageously. It's about how are you living as if? How are you choosing to behave? And when we are trying to get out of addictions, when we're trying to get away from trauma, when we're trying to heal from things that have broken us, it doesn't make a lot of sense to just sit there and try to feel healed. It doesn't make that's not how this works. That's not how the human body, that's not the human mind, that's not how the human soul works. To just sit there and try to wait for a feeling of wholeness, and that's how I know I'm whole. Instead, if you want to feel alive, you act as if you are alive. You take the steps of what it would be if you were alive. And instead of basing your behavior on how you feel or how things look, You choose to allow something else to be the determinant of reality, and you live in that reality. That's how faith works. You say, well, that sounds really weird and esoteric. Okay, fine. Fair enough. Fair enough, okay? Let's move this out of religion. Let's take this away from religion. Let's say you want to become a football star. Well, do you just sit on your bed and try to feel like a football star? No. What you do is you live as a football star would live. You exercise, you work out as a football star would work out. You eat as a football star would eat. You pattern your life after the pattern of what a football star would do. And guess what? You become a football star. Now let's transport that back into faith. That's what Jesus is. He's our football star. We're to live as if we were behaving like him. Actually, I see your question is believing loyalty, living as if. Yes, it is. So believing loyalty is living as if God is the Most High God, and living as if we are his and he is ours. That believing loyalty is living as if he were God. So making decisions based on the reality that he says exists. That's believing loyalty. Not allowing some other God to determine how I live or what I do or what is. That's believing loyalty. So this is a dynamic that shifts and flows back between faith and recovery, where recovery lets me know what's my next step. Sometimes in faith community, the common vernacular, like what we would say is, well, just pray and God will tell you what to do. Well, honestly, what if I can't pray right now? What if praying is not working for me? Then what? Then recovery steps in and says, well, you can start with step one. You can always start with step one. No matter what situation you face, you can always start with step one. Maybe in faith communities, it would be common to say, well, if you have this problem, this thing that for some people might be arrogance or anger. And no matter how hard you try, you can't change yourself. You can't be any different. Well, what do? So what people say is, well, you need to read your Bible more. You need to pray more. You need to be at church more. You need to confess more. Okay, fair enough. But what if that doesn't work? Well, the 12 steps tell you that you realize your character defects and you become willing to have God remove them, and you humbly ask him to take them away. And once you do that, and here's the interplay. Once you do that, then what are you supposed to do? Well, faith steps in and says, well, then you have to live as if he's going to. Live as if he will. Live as if he has. Live as if... And so there's this beautiful back and forth. And that's why I say faith and recovery, because they're both present in each other. They're both connected to each other. They are intermeshed between each other, and they feed each other. And the symbiosis, like what they give to each other, is so beautiful and powerful. I come from a background where there's lots of faith and not much recovery. So guess what? There's not a lot of. There's not a lot of growth. But then I go into recovery circles where there's not a lot of faith, and guess what? There's not a lot of. There's not a lot of longevity. People bounce in and out all the time. I bounce in and out. They're sober for 9 months, year and a half, 2 years, and boom, they're gone again. They have nothing to pull them through that lull. Like as long as they're climbing in their recovery, they're great. But as soon as life takes a little dip, then they're all the way down, because faith is what sustains in those moments. So faith and recovery. I think another thing that comes to mind when I think of faith and recovery and how they interact with each other, how they work well together. The Bible talks about the New Testament particularly tries to take the beauty of the Old Testament and translate it for Gentiles who don't know anything. And they use this picture of the body, of there being different parts, different pieces of the body, and each one having its own function, each one having its own needs, each one having its own way of contributing. And if I were to if I were to try to pick a part of the body to somehow, illustrate faith and recovery, I would go to the nervous system. And I wouldn't tie it to the brain because the brain is complex. We don't know that much about it yet. But I would look at the nervous system, like the spinal cord and the nerves that go out to our hands and our feet. You have information that is sent to the muscles. So you have nerves that go to the hand and tell the hand what to do. But then you have nerves that come from the hand and tell the brain what is reality, what is happening. And I would see the faith part as the informing part. So the message coming from the hand back to the body, hey, this is what's going on. Faith is that. Faith is saying, this is the reality I'm going to believe in. This is what I'm going to say is true. This is how I'm going to perceive reality. When that person says something mean and destructive to me like they have 50 million times before, I'm not going to believe that it's true. I'm going to live as if they are not telling me the truth. And I'm going to live as if what God tells me about myself, that's true. So that's the message coming in. I would say that's the faith part. But then the recovery part is that message coming out and saying, this is what you do. Move your hand this way. Grab this, lift this, push this, pull this. If you have a body that is only receiving messages, so it's full of faith, but there's no recovery, that's called paralysis. And paralysis will eventually kill you because you can't get out of the way of things that are dangerous. You can't feed yourself. You can't, if it's bad enough, you can't breathe. If there's no message going out and creating action and movement, that's paralysis, and that will kill you. But let's say that on the other side, you don't have the ability for messages to come in. So there's no information coming in. Your body is basically operating blind. So there's no faith. You also will die. Because you will harm yourself and never know it. You will stick your hand in a fire and not know that you're destroying your hand. You will if you're not receiving messages, you won't know that you're walking into a brick wall or walking off of a cliff. Like, you have to have both. I think that if I were looking for a text in the Bible, I would go to James, and he talks about faith and works and how you got to have both. But the reason that I don't just keep it as faith and works, and the reason I have faith and recovery, is because, well, I'm kind of tipping my hand, but you guys know I don't do secrets. So I'm going to lay this out there, and for what it's worth, if you have questions, post it, and we can go from there. Remember, I told you that recovery, the 12 steps, working recovery, gets us from the bottom of the iceberg up to where our heads are just poking above water, our noses are above water. That's recovery. It gets us that far. So then how do you get to the top of the iceberg? That's called spiritual formation. That's called spiritual formation. So basically you have a lifetime to conform who we are to the image of what we ought to be, and to unveil who our innermost selves are. That's spiritual formation. And so if we don't, so recovery is basically getting us above water. And I feel like for myself, I was too broken, I was too hurt, I couldn't do the work of spiritual formation. And I had these people shouting spiritual formation slogans to me in my faith community, and it did me no good. I was underwater. I need to know how to get above water. Don't tell me about a relationship with God when I can't stay sober. Okay? Don't tell me about growing in the Word when I can't when I can't stay clean. Let's not even go there. I need to get above water first. And so that's why I like the word recovery, because it talks about us getting back to something, us coming out of something. And so that's the beauty of that, is because we come back to life, but we don't just come back to life to lay there. We come back to life to go into that lifetime work, that calling, that vocation of spiritual formation. One last thing, and then we'll be finished. Thank you guys all for joining. And I'm sorry about the technical stuff earlier, just the way I am sometimes. Don't know which button I'm pushing. Faith and recovery is something that some people are going to enter into one side or the other. Very few people embrace both at the same time. Very few people walk up to this topic and they're like, yes, I totally want faith and I totally want recovery. So most of us come into this equation from one side or the other. And the fear sometimes is if someone is coming from a faith community and they leave that because of whatever pain or brokenness, I can identify with that. Then there's this built-in suspicion toward faith. And there's this almost carte blanche toward recovery. So I'll believe anything recovery, I'll read all the recovery books, I'll do all the recovery stuff, but the moment that someone starts talking about faith, then I back off because that hurts, okay? Maybe someone has been in a recovery setting and they have been in and out and they keep falling and finally they go to church one day and it just clicks. So they're going to feel like faith is the whole picture and recovery is something to be gotten away from or is ineffective or whatever. All I'm asking is to give the other a chance. Give some space. Allow for the fact that this may be something that can work together. Now, I do say that a little tongue-in-cheek because I have devoted my life for the past few years to showing how those two work together. So I do feel like there's not really much of a contest there. But what I would say is that if you are concerned about how they work together, I would love to be a resource. I would love to respond to any questions you have, any concerns you have about how those two can play nicely together. And I'm going to wrap this up, but I just want to say one more thing. Oh, hey Q. Good to see you there. Recovery is one of those things that when you enter into it, you don't realize how big it is. You don't know at the beginning how much you're getting into. Faith is that way too. These are concepts, these are realities that are so much bigger than us, so much deeper than us. So if you get into it and it starts to feel too big, that's not a surprise. That you're not doing it wrong. That's just the way it is. This is why in the recovery community we talk about having a sponsor or accountability partners, and this is why in faith communities we talk about having a good pastor and a good church family to be a part of, because these are bigger than just I'll manage it by myself. That's a myth. You don't do recovery and you don't do faith, either one, in isolation. Neither one of those can be done properly in isolation. They're overwhelming, and they'll actually turn to poison. You can't. I don't know if you guys watch movies, but Guardians of the Galaxy, it's like trying to hold the purple stone. Like you have to have more than one person to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off now. If any of you have any other questions, I'm here. I can respond to them. If not, I'll give you a couple seconds. If not, we'll go ahead and be finished. I'll be doing this again next Friday at 9 o'clock, and I would love to see you guys all there. Love you all.